Okay, guys, we're going to read chapter 4 in our book, Civil War on Sunday. And so, Jack and Annie have been whisked by the magic tree house back to the Civil War, and they're having kind of different feelings about being there. Annie seems like she's kind of taken to the role. She's jumped right in. She wanted to help the fallen soldier. She wants to help the nurses. She's kind of wanting to stay and help and be a part of it. Jack, on the other hand, he's feeling sad about being there. He does not like it, and he's ready to go home, which is interesting because back in the very first chapter, when they found out that they were going to have to go to the Civil War, Jack is the one that said, war. He said, the Civil War, said Jack. Cool. Annie frowned. Cool, she said. War is not cool. It sort of is, Jack said uncomfortably. He knew war was bad, but some parts of it seemed fun, like a game. That's what he thought before he got there. That's what he thought when he was safe and sound back in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania, and in the treehouse. Now that he's actually here, now that he's in the midst of the war, he's on the battlefield, he sees soldiers getting wounded, he's not as excited about this war as he was before. So let's see what's going to happen in chapter 4, and chapter 4 is titled Freedom Fighters. So let's find out what that means. Freedom Fighters. Jack carried the water bucket into the tent. The scene inside was like a nightmare. So what do you think, knowing that he and Annie were sent to go into the first 2 tents to give the noon meal and some comfort to the wounded soldiers, and he said the scene, when he goes inside the tent, the scene is like a nightmare. So think for a second, what do you imagine? Like, think about looking around the tent. What do you imagine that he's seeing? What do you think is in there? The tent was hot and stuffy. A dozen injured soldiers lay on small cots. Some called for food, others begged for water or just moaned. So a dozen injured soldiers. A dozen, that is 12. So in this tent, there are 12 injured men that are moaning and groaning, and they're in pain, and they're begging for food. And it's very hot. Not a lot of air moving in there. Jack wanted to rush back outside, but Annie got right to work. She rolled up her sleeves and smiled. Remember, that's one of the things on their list. They were given a list of things to do, and the first thing said, be cheerful. So she rolls up her sleeves, she smiles, she's ready to go. Hi, everybody, she said cheerfully. None of the soldiers smiled back. I have good news, she said. We've brought lunch. Annie moved down the row of cots. She handed out pieces of bread and chunks of potatoes to all the patients. You'll be feeling better soon, she said to one sick man. You'll see your family again, she told another. Jack looked around nervously. He wasn't sure what to do. Give them water, Jack, Annie called to him. Jack saw a tin cup beside each man's cot. He picked up the first cup. Carefully, he used the ladle to fill the cup. So a ladle, that's like, it's like a long-handled spoon, but it has like kind of a cup on the end, so you can scoop up water or soup. You can ladle it up and pour it into the cup. Keeping his eyes down, Jack handed the cup to the patient. He felt shy and uncomfortable. He didn't know what to say. Have you guys ever been in that situation where you might be around someone new, or you're in a new situation and you just don't know what to say? You're just kind of uncomfortable. You don't really want to be there. You don't know what to say to somebody. He's got that feeling. He's just feeling shy and uncomfortable and doesn't know what to do. Jack moved on to the next patient, then the next. He gave each wounded man a cup of water, but he never looked right at any of them or spoke a word. So that's showing how shy he is. He's doing the water, but he's not really looking at them. He's not talking to them. He's just ladling the water and moving on. Soon Jack and Annie had finished passing out food and water. Goodbye, Annie said. She waved and left the tent. Jack quickly followed her. Let's go home now, he begged. Once they were outside, we've got what we came for. If we leave now, the patients in the next tent will go hungry and thirsty, said Annie. Jack sighed. Okay, he said, but after we take care of them, we're leaving for sure. He followed Annie into the next tent. Just like the last tent, it was filled with wounded soldiers. But the soldiers in this tent were all African Americans. Hi, everybody, Annie said, smiling warmly. Again, she passed out potatoes and bread. She also talked and made jokes. Jack poured water into each of the 10 cups. Again, he did not speak to any of the soldiers, but he handed over the last cup. But as he handed over the last cup, a patient spoke to him. Thank you for your kindness, son, the soldier said. Jack glanced shyly at the man on the cot. He was an elderly, silver-haired black man. You're welcome, said Jack. He tried to think of something else to say. He remembered Annie's cheerful words. You'll get well soon, he told the patient. You'll be with your family again. The man shook his head. No, I'll never be with my family again, he said quietly. My wife and children were sold long ago. Sold? Said Jack. What do you think that means? Here's the man in the cot. There's Annie in the background. You see the lantern. You see the crutches right here. So what do you think he's talking about if he says that his family was sold? Think back to this point in history. What was going on? Yes, we were slaves, the man said. You were a slave? Asked Jack. All of us in this tent were once slaves, the man said. We ran from our owners in the South to fight to end slavery, to fight for freedom for our people. There's that word again. The title of our chapter is Freedom Fighters. And he says he's fighting for the freedom of our people. I ran barefoot for over 30 miles to tell the Union soldiers that the Confederates were going to attack. The man fell silent. You're a brave freedom fighter, said Jack. Thank you, son. The man closed his eyes. Jack wanted to know more about slavery, but he didn't want to bother the weary patient. And there's that word again, weary. Remember, what did we say that weary means? It means that you're tired, just kind of broken. He pulled out the Civil War book. He found a picture of African Americans standing on a platform. The men, women, and children had chains on their hands and feet. Jack read, in the 1800s, this is the part that he read out of his Civil War book that he had in his knapsack. In the 1800s, the United States was divided over the issue of slavery. The North wanted the country to end all slavery, but the South wanted to keep slaves because more than 4 million African American slaves worked in the huge plantation fields there. This disagreement between the North and the South led to the Civil War. Jack looked down at the man's face. He looked very weary. Jack pulled the nurse's list of rules from his knapsack, and one of the rules said, lessen sorrow and give hope. So lessen sorrow means to make less, to decrease, to take away some of the sorrow and the sadness, and to give hope, to give him hope that something better will come along. Jack put the list away. He leaned close to the man and spoke in a soft voice. One day, your great-great-grandchildren will be doctors and lawyers, he said. The man opened his eyes. Jack went on. They'll help run the government and schools. They'll be senators and generals and teachers and principals. The man stared hard into Jack's eyes. Can you see the future, son? He asked. Jack nodded. In a way. So what does it mean that Jack is saying that in a way he can see the future? How does Jack know what's going to happen to this man's great-great-grandchildren? How does he know that in the future that the ancestors of this man and all the other African Americans in the tent are going to be able to do things that they can't in this point in history. They're going to be in the government, running the schools, doctors, lawyers, all these things that this man can't even imagine as possible. It's because Jack is from the future, right? Jack has traveled back in time to the Civil War, but Jack is from the future, and Jack already knows what things are like today. The man smiled a beautiful smile. "Thank you, son," he said. Then he closed his eyes again. "Good luck," whispered Jack. He hoped the brave man would live to enjoy freedom. "Ready to go home now, Jack?" said Annie. She had finished passing out the food. Jack nodded. As he and Annie stepped out of the tent, they heard someone shout, "She's back!" A horse-drawn wagon was barreling into the camp. "Who's back?" asked Annie. "Clara Barton," a patient said. "She runs this hospital." "Clara Barton," said Annie. "I don't believe it." "Who's Clara Barton?" asked Jack. He had heard the name before, but he couldn't remember who she was. "Who's Clara Barton?" said Annie. "Are you nuts?" She ran to meet the wagon. Okay, so you guys have, I'm giving you copies out of this book. This book is called Civil War Heroines. And each of you have some different copies out of this book. But this whole book is about different women and how they contributed during the Civil War. And Clara Barton is in here. Let's see if we can find Clara Barton. Well, I know she's in here. Maybe. Here it is. Clara Barton. So here's Clara Barton right here. She's a real person. Her name was Clarissa Barton. They called her Clara. Clara Barton was working as a clerk in Washington, D.C. in 1861 when a Union regiment arrived in town, bloodied from a mob attack by secession sympathizers in Baltimore. She gave them baskets of towels, handkerchiefs, and bandages, and then asked friends to donate food, clothes, and other supplies. For Clara, it was the start of a new career as a one-woman Soldiers' Aid Society. She begged everyone she knew for food and clothes and advertised for donations for medical supplies. When her apartment could hold no more, she rented space in a warehouse. She heard about the Battle of Cedar Mountain, Virginia. Now remember, where are these guys? They're in Virginia. They were in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania. The Magic Treehouse took them to Virginia, and arrived 2 days later with a mule team loaded with supplies, just as the field hospital ran low on dressings. So we learned what a field hospital is. That's the hospital that's built quickly and temporarily on the battlefield to take care of the soldiers. And just as they're running out of supplies, here she comes with a mule team loaded full of supplies. She worked 5 days and nights with only 3 hours of sleep, handing out supplies and carrying food and water to men still lying on the field. She was like an angel of the battlefield, said Brigade Surgeon James Dunn. For 3 years, Clara Barton followed Army operations in Virginia and around Charleston, South Carolina. At Antietam, surgeons dressed wounds with corn husk until she appeared with bandages. So they were out. They had no supplies. If you had a big cut on your leg or your arm, they wrapped corn husk around it. That's all they had. But then here comes Claire with her supplies that she's begged from people, that she's gotten donated, that she's collected. Here she comes with her bandages. Later, she organized a program for locating men listed missing in action. By the end of the war, she had done most of her task later associated with the American Red Cross, an organization she founded in 1881. So that is an important person to know about, Clara Barton. So she is in our book. So when they're like, oh, thank goodness Clara Barton's here, they're saying, thank goodness she's here because we're out of supplies, and they know that she's going to bring them medical supplies. Okay? So that's the end of chapter 4. We'll read chapter 5 tomorrow, and then that will be it for this week. See ya.